So this is part 2 of the tutorial on using Skinman to create graphics for Air Manager and other instruments that require panel instruments that require 3D graphics. For those of you who don't want to dive into the world of 3D design and rendering, modeling, and so on. If you haven't seen part 1, I strongly suggest you go there because I'm not going to cover all the points that I covered before, and some of this will build on the previous video. So my suggestion is go back, view that, and then pick up this and then continue on in the series. Now, just a little bit about some of the things I talked about in the last presentation. I did talk a little bit about what this white area, that represents the actual area that gets exported or printed or whatever you do with this image. That's the actual bounds of the image. So if I would to put a rectangle here and then export this image, the background, even though we can set a color there, if we export it over here, if we export the image as a PNG with alpha, that background area around the sides remains just clear, transparent. So that's just something to remember. Any area, even though there's a white background there or whatever color you select, if you select alpha, the background doesn't go with it. So what it would look like if we exported this as a PNG with alpha would be a big clear area with the bounds of this square and this pink area in the middle. Now, as I said yesterday, with the image you can set the size. Let's just set this for something reasonable to work on an instrument. Say 500 by 500, assuming we're using going to make a square instrument, and we'll say OK. And you can see that we have the object here. So there's some menus here that are quite useful. For example, down here where it says align, if we select an object and select, for example, horizontal center, it will center this object horizontally centered. And this is useful. A lot of times you're building instruments that are symmetrical and you want the needles and so on to rotate, and they always rotate around the center, so it's good to have the ability to center things. You can also align horizontal vertical, align vertical center, and you can see now it's perfectly centered. And you can also use that, let's say a separate object. Let's say you wanted to put in a hole in there. You could create a, let's do it with, let me do this as a with the shift key down and make a symmetrical, oops, I didn't select the object. Let's select, with the shift key down and a circle. I'm going to change the color just so it's visible. Okay, let's get the color changed here. And I'm going to drag it over here and it's on top. Now you can see I'll put it right over here. If I select align vertical center, oops, align vertical center, and then align horizontal center, you can see now that that's centered there. So it's just a way to keep things symmetrical and when they're grouped together. If you group something like this ellipse, if I group it over here, you can see I've grouped it with the blue object as a child and the rectangle as a parent. Then if I move this, it moves as a group. And if I select align horizontal center and align vertical center, you notice it doesn't do anything because it's aligning all the objects. Let's say let's put another object in here. Let's put one of these stars in here. We'll put that in there and we'll make that a different color. Let's make that purple, or yeah, something like that, and add a few more vertexes and maybe a little star depth just to make it look better. Oh, I got vortexes. Star depth. Anyway, if we select that and make it part of the object, and then I click this entire object and say align vertical center, and align horizontal center. Unfortunately, there's not an align everything. You can see now that those are, or now the ellipse is underneath there, but I'll pull it on top. Remember the layers, I'll pull it down. And now you can see, now I have those things all perfectly lined up. And it's very simple to do that. The other thing, I'm going to grab this whole group and delete it. You can see I can delete that whole group. Let's show you one other thing. Let's make some circles here. And I'm going to copy that and paste. I'll just hit the arrow keys here to slide that over. In fact, I'm going to slide it up a little too to make it and I'm going to grab both of these. Oops. And you notice when you want to grab something, you got to go all the way around the bounds of it. And I'm going to say Control C and Control V. I'm going to drag that over here. Okay, now what we can do is we can select all these objects. They're all separate objects. You can see nothing's apparent. And we'll go to this menu and we'll say the alignment. We can align all those objects the same way. But the other thing we can do is distribution. If we say distribute horizontal center, it's going to align the centers of those so they're distributed evenly. Watch what happens. See, it moved those so that there was equal horizontal spacing. If we go down here and select distribution vertical center, now it aligned those two groups. We can also grab these and say align top. Let's say align vertical center. You can see that lines them up. So you get the idea. You can distribute them in a vertical and horizontal, which just gives you equal spacing. And that's pretty useful a lot of times. Or you can do it vertically, horizontally, or you can also align them vertically or horizontally. In this case, if I align them horizontal centers, they'd all be on top of each other. You get the idea there. So let's zoom back in here and get rid of these objects here. And let's look at the different options on the palette here. And just go down through. Of course, there's an arrow selection, which you can create a marquee to select objects. And there's a hand object that allows you to move, to pan around on the image. For example, here, if we put this here, we can move the whole image around. If we use the arrow, we can select things, just like any other program you would expect. Let's look at this rectangle. I'm going to go through this again. Some of this I talked about in the previous video, but I want to cover this one more time since it's a key point. Now that we have selected the object and it shows up in the layers tree, if you will, here, and as I said yesterday, they go from furthest back, and as we go down, they move forward in the layers. So the object at the bottom will be on top. Again, here, let's look closely at these properties. Now you can see it has the type of object it is, in this case a rectangle. You can change it here to some degree. It'll maintain the coordinates, but you can change an object once it's there if you had the size already set. And you can see the position, again, the X coordinate, the Y coordinate, and as I said, there's a little button here, or the menu over here that there's a pop-up menu here that says copy coordinate to clipboard, and that will copy the X and Y coordinate of this point with a comma in between it. So you still would have to know the size of the object, and in this case you can read the corner of the object is down here. That's the location of that. But over here you can read this width, see 224, and the height of 240. So 136 is the distance over, 80 is the distance down to this upper left corner. It's the same way we measure in Air Manager the coordinate system that we use for objects. The upper left corner and then the width and the height to get to the bottom right corner. So these right here, these properties are the same, or in all of the objects you'll have to the location. So that's pretty standard. And we talked also about operations yesterday, how we can take multiple objects and put them either together or intersect them or subtract objects from the parent object to create other shapes. And then a slant we talked about, that's just a number of degrees. And again, I can put the mouse in there and change it 1 degree at a time by placing the I-beam cursor in that field, just hovering over there and use my mouse. Or I can grab these little pop-up arrows there and do it that way. And I can also make a textural input with the keyboard back to 0. Same thing with angle. You can move that. I'll show you one thing that's interesting though. Let's say we put another object here, let's say another square, and I'm going to change the color just to make it obvious that it's a different object. Okay, and I'm going to make that a child of the other object. So now you can see oops, you can see on the left here, I'm dragging that up so that the green object, which you see how it's highlighted in blue there, showing us that that's the object that's selected, and I can select the parent. When I select the parent, I get the entire object. I get all the objects in it. So it's kind of, you would assume that if I changed the angle here, that it would have changed the entire group. But look what happens. If I change that, well, that one's selected. It changed only the parent. If I change the child object there and grab that one, it affects that. But I can't move them. If I try to move them together, it doesn't happen. Now, even more so, watch what happens here. If I make the green one, I'm going to select the green object. I'm going to make it a shape plus, so it's part of the shape. Okay. Now watch what happens when I change the angle. See, even if I select, that's if I select the object. Now, if I select the parent object, watch what happens. It still doesn't work. It doesn't move both of them. And you would think that you could, so you can't build a complex thing and then rotate it all at once, unfortunately. You could render it and then import it as a picture with maybe with an alpha layer and then rotate it, but you can't rotate it as a group here. So that's a shortcoming that you could get used to, because you make a very complex shape, you might want to rotate it. That doesn't happen. So anyway, we talked yesterday about the X and Y corners, how we can create different styles of corners for an object. Let me get rid of the child object here. Delete. And let me get this back to so it's square. Looks more normal. 0 into the angle. And as I said, if we set one number in here, it gives us that number for all the number of pixels to set back from the corner in both directions to create the shape. So I'll say 50, and you can see it's 50 pixels back from the corner. And we have, of course, different styles. The clip, the direct straight line, the negative circle, the cutout L shape or square, and then the rounded corner. And then again, as I said, you can say separate. In other words, make each corner be inset the same amount. I'll take this bottom left one here, and I'm going to make it. You can see, but the inset is the same in both directions, unless we click X, Y, and then I'm going to change this one, this bottom left one here, in the Y direction. I'm going to make it even larger, and you can see how that side's growing. That one's 342 pixels, and the inset on this corner here is only 152. So that's how that works. We have fill colors. As I said yesterday, you click on the color and then come over to the color picker. You can select the color. You can select a secondary fill. Let's take this yellowish color and make it a little lighter. And then we can take the gradient tool down here and we can drag it and we can make it. And you can see the gradient is in the direction from where you click to where you in, and it goes from the primary color, first fill color, to the second fill color. So it gives you an ability to make the gradient as sharp as you want. The further apart the 2 points are, the more gentle the gradient, and the direction between those is the direction of the gradient. So that's kind of killing two birds with one stone, explaining the gradient. If you click outside the point after you've done that, it just gets rid of the gradient. You have to release it and select another object before it will stay, if you will. So that's that feature. Now, the gradations can be symmetric, radial, or linear. Let's look at radial. I'll grab the gradient tool here, and you can see how that creates a radial. And I can select linear, which is a default, and I can select symmetric, which makes it go in both directions, which sometimes is useful. So anyway, and you can change the values, you can see, of these gradients and make them wider or less, and you can smooth them also with changing the numbers in there. Now let's get rid of all that, and let's go back. Let's change the color. Oh, it's too dark or too light. And let's see, I need to select the primary color, and we'll do that. Now, fill says we will fill the object. We have a border, and as we select border, it will create a border in the color that we have here. In this case, it's black, but you can see the border is external. It can be either external or internal or both. External means it's going to expand the dimensions. It's going to be outside the dimensions. Internal means it'll be inside. It won't enlarge the object. In both, it will go in and out the same amount. And the amount is this border width. Now, as I select the border width, it was 1 pixel before there. You really couldn't hardly see it. But as I make that border bigger, that border becomes more visible. And as I change the color of the border, for example, let's get it. It's got to change the density here too. But you can see I have the blue border there, and we can make that smaller value or whatever. But that's how that's adjusted. Now, when the border has a sharp corner, and let's get rid of this, and let's get rid of separate XYs, and let's just take this thing back to a square corner. You can see there's different. You see how, if you can look at this corner, I'll make it a little bigger so it's slightly more noticeable. But you can see how the border corner is rounded on the outside. If I select here to bevel, you can see it bevels the edge off. And if I select miter, it miters it to a point. Now, master alpha is just a master alpha for the entire object. If you want to make the object less than 100% alpha, which I've never used, but that enables you to do that. You can also diffuse the object here if you want to make it look a little bit softer. You can diffuse an image, an object and of course anti-alias, which I've always had on. So let's get rid of this border before we go to the next feature. So let's scroll on down and look at some of the lighting effects. First of all, the specular effects. There's 2 lights available. I'm going to say there's 3 types. Flat, which gives you a flat line, and you can change the angle of the highlight. You can change the specular value and change the focus of that. You can change the highlight, how bright that highlight is, or negative. You can change the highlight width, which makes the width of that highlight longer. Let's go back to a smaller number so it's more manageable. The highlight is a little too bright, but you can see with a little highlight we can add that. And then you can change the ambient, in other words the overall lighting. It just kind of dims the whole thing. And then you could create let's look at the same thing with a spherical, and you can see that gives us a spherical, and we can change the width of that too. Here I'm going to change by dragging that down. I can make, and for some objects that are round, this is quite effective. Not so great on a square object because there's the corners show, but for a round object, like a three-dimensional object, you want to look like a ball or something protruding out, that's perfect. Or you can go negative and make it look like an indentation. Then we have the finally the spherical and then the metal. And when we select the metal, it gives us this metallic look. Again, we can adjust the highlight width, but again, on a round object, let's change this to an ellipse. You can see that looks a little more effective. It looks almost like a piece of metal that's been turned and polished off. And we can change the highlight width. We can change the ambient light. We can change to make it look more and more like a metal object. The specular highlight can be changed, and and so on. So you get the idea. We can offset it. You can offset the circular, the spherical. You can select this offset and direction. You can see you can move that back and forth to give it an effect that you want. And when you play around with these a while, it becomes pretty effective. You can add a second, let's say a second highlight, and these two can be working at the same time. And you can maybe change the angles so that together they add up to give you what you want. Let's get rid of that effect. You can just do that by selecting none on both of these. Let's walk on down to the emboss. And as we talked about in the last video, the emboss gives you that dimensional appeal where from the direction of the light, which normally is -45. Now to explain the angular arrangement in Skinman, you can see that 0 degrees is always measured from the top. The top lighting coming from 0 degrees would be straight down. So from that straight down being 0 degrees, or the 0 degree reference, counterclockwise is -degrees, and positive direction is to the clockwise direction. Remember this this system of measurement because it's the same one used in arcs and start and stop points for some of the points where some of the objects we're going to look at later. So the default direction of lighting for all objects, unless you set it otherwise, is always -45, which is from the top left, and it's become pretty much a convention for Air Manager instrument builders. That way the lighting looks consistent on all the instruments that we make. So if we intermix different instruments, they'll fit together and look right. We can click the direction button here, and we can change that angle to whatever we want. But you can see how the shadow moves around as though the light's changing. And if we put 0 in there, you can see that it's coming from the top to the bottom. If we get -40, if we get 45, it's coming from up here from this 45-degree direction. -45 is 45 degrees this way. It would be going in that direction, and that's pretty much the default we use. Most everyone uses for instruments. Now the emboss width has to do with the shoulder, if you will. See, as I change that to 41 pixels, it makes that rounding coming in from the side to look like it's 41 pixels in, and creates a wider, less sharp angle, as you will, a beveled angle. And we can go back to 0 or to a very low value, and you can see it gives an effect of a sharper corner. You can also change the depth of the border to give it a little more three-dimensional effect. Now let's go get rid of this. I'm going to change the emboss depth. I'm going to get rid of this big border and call it a 0, and I'm going to get the width of this back to about 5, and I'm going to change the and leave the. I'm going to give it just a little more depth of field. Now we can select texture, and here there's a bunch of textures, and I think there's some way to load additional textures, but if we select a texture, and then we have to select an intensity. Now I selected fabric, and you can see it adds that fabric. They've several textures that are useful for creating instruments. This sand here, it can give you kind of a rough effect, especially if you don't make it overdo it, but it can give you the effect of a little more. And then if we came over here to the color of this, which is down here or up here, if I selected fill one color and made it a little darker, maybe by dragging this down here, and then we add back in the specular highlight, to make it look a little bit more realistic. We can create some effects that look a little more real and three-dimensional. So we can again use a different intensity, and we can use some of the different ones that are loaded already, like magma, and then sometimes that gives you kind of a nice modeled look on some of your panels and so on. So that's another way to look at that. Then finally, and we're almost done with the first one, and I assure you most of these are on all of them, so we won't have to go over them again. But the drop shadow. Now the drop shadow can be, again, the direction of that drop shadow normally is with the light coming from the upper left, but you can click direction and set that. You can also select offset, the density. So I'm going to bring the density up to 100%. And I'm going to play with the offset. Now it's offsetting in a minus 45 degree angle from the top left to the bottom right. And if I go to, say, you can see how I'm moving that shadow out from under. And I can even go a negative offset and bring it up there. But when I normally, you're going to want to probably something 8 is default, and you probably sometimes even want less. The more shadow you put in, the taller the object's going to look. And finally, you can adjust that density, and then you can also, and I'll do this with the scroll wheel, you can also change the diffusing it. You can diffuse that to give it a little more realistic look, because we all know shadows don't look sharp. And this is a bit unrealistic looking because, as you recall, I changed the direction of the embossing here. Let me get back to standard. And now it looks more realistic because the light is coming from the same direction on both the underlying shadow and the drop shadow. And we can change the diffusing, and we can bring it back a little closer and make it look a little bit better. You can also create an inside shadow, which kind of creates a shadow that's on the inside the object. And sometimes when two objects are next to each other, you can use that effect to make an effective shadow from the first object on the second object. But that's getting pretty advanced. So that takes care of the rectangle. Now, as I said, most of the other objects use a lot of the same properties, especially as far as lighting and that sort of thing. So I won't have to go through those, but I'm going to go on now and move on to the next object. So let's get rid of that. Get rid of that. Delete. Oh, I didn't select it. Delete. And let's come up here to the circle. Now, again, if I hold the Shift key down, it makes a nice equal circle. You can see the width and the height are the same. And then we have the same operation, slant, angle are the same. The main thing is that we can have a start and a stop angle. And the measure, again, north straight up is 0 degrees. So you can see it starts at minus 180, which would mean starting from down here, and it ends at plus 180. So in reality, there's an invisible line here, and this circle is made up of an arc all the way around to there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the start angle and I'm going to make it down to a lesser value. Let's go to let's set it to minus 45. You can see, and then the stop angle is at 180, and that can be brought up to any value. And you notice you can even go beyond. You can go all the way to, beyond where it would cover itself, if you will. But that's how that works. Coloring is the same, gradation, all that stuff. Those are all more of lighting effects. If you have the pi effect, you can see how it shows you, it keeps the center and creates the two radii. You can also get rid of the pi effect, and it'll just draw the arc directly from, or the chord directly from the arc at those same places that the center would be. So you get the idea on that. Of course, border, fill, all that stuff is exactly the same as far as creating borders and so on. Same thing with the lighting effects. Embossing effects work exactly the same. Textures, and so on. So that's the main difference with the circle, is that or the ellipse is actually an ellipse, but if it's constrained to equal height and width, it's a circle, and that's how that works. So let's get rid of that, and let's go on to the next object, which is one of my favorites. I'm going to hold the shift key down again to make a symmetrical shape, and this is the star shape. Now the star, as you can see, has the same coordinates, and everything's the same. As far as slant and angle, it can be rotated. Here's where we get to something different, where there's a number of vertices, and that's the number of points. As you can see, there's 3 there. That's the default. But let's say we wanted this. Let's say we said 20. Now there's 20 vertices around that circle. Star depth is how far from the radius, how far in the mid chord point is taken. Let's show you this. Let's say star depth is let's say 90, and you can see how that pulls the mid chord point in and creates this effect that can be very useful for creating, say, knobs and so on. So let's increase the number of vertices to, say, 40. And then the next thing we can do is the curve. And what the curve does is it can soften those points, and see how that changes the looks of that just a little bit, and that gives it a really nice look for knobs and so on. The twist I haven't found much use for, because unless you want to draw saw blades or something, but what that does is you can see it twists the vertices around. It looks cool. And if you wanted to make a saw blade or something, it would work for that, but not too practical. So let's go back to 0 on that. And the rest of the attributes here are pretty much the same. You don't have a start or stop angle on these. These are only round objects, or complete 360-degree objects that you can use. But most of all the other effects are the same. And I think you'll find that this is going to be very useful to you. And sometimes I've noticed if it's difficult to see the colors if they're the same. Sometimes it's good to put a little border on there. You'll say give it a border color that's a little brighter or darker, so it gives some contrast. And you turn the border on, and you can see how that just adds a little bit of delineation where those are, if it was lying over something that was, say, the same color as the background, or knobs that are on top of each other. And you can put all those other effects onto this thing. So let's get rid of that, and we're going to text. Text is very useful, obviously. when you put text on there, it defaults to the word text in Arial and 12 font and so on, 100% aspect and spacing. Again, as coordinates, you can slant it. I'll show you that in a minute, but let's make this larger. One way to do that is to just go over here to the font size, and I'm going to mouse wheel it up to make it larger. I'll grab a different font just to show you how that's changed. Let's get something that's Arial black, let's say. And then we have the ability to change not only the size here, we can do that, by dragging the corners. Or if we want to do it, say we can change the aspect ratio. Oops. And the size by just dragging it around. But you can also do it mathematically. And if you want to keep the fonts to be kind of an even size, it's like 100.1692. Let's just call it 100. And the aspect ratios, and that's so I tend to do it with the mouse wheel, which gives me a nice even number here. I'll change that to 65. The font spacing here, and I'm going to do that with the mouse wheel, that just affects the spacing between the letters. You can tighten that up or whatever as needed. You can't, unfortunately, change the kern or change the spacing between each letter, but you could put separate letters up there and move them that way and use the align tools to make sure their tops and bottoms are lined up. And you can, again, change the font to bold if you like. You can change to italic. You can change auto size. I'm not sure exactly what auto size does. And then the other option here that you can do is, as we said, slant, which is italic in my opinion, and you can change the angle too. So you can change the angle of text. Unfortunately, so far as I've learned, if you want to create like vertical text, you have to create each letter and then manually place them there, so it can be kind of a pain in the butt. There's a way to use a text path. I'm not going to go into that here. That's pretty advanced, but there is a way that you can create a text path and have the text follow that path. And the rest of that's pretty much the same. Again, you can, just like we talked about, you can emboss this text. You can change the color, of course, and you can emboss it and create drop shadows. So watch this, I'll just emboss it. You can see that. I can change the border width, and I can also create a drop shadow for that text, and so on. So you can create some neat effects there using Skinman. Let's get rid of the text. Delete. And look briefly at these, which I demoed. And there's not a whole lot to this, but this is a drawing tool, the filled shape, where you can create objects by creating points, and then close it by clicking on the starting point, and it gives you a filled object that you can set a color on and so on. You can set a color. You can do all the other lighting effects on it. But the main thing you can do is right-click, and come down here and select Edit Shape. You select Edit Shape. You click on a point. You can pull the Bezier handles out and change the shape. So as you click on it, click on a point. If you click off, you lose the editing. You have to go back and select with a right click, Edit Shape, and then click on there, and then you can pull these out. And you can move them. It's a little tricky, but after a while you can make some very, very interesting shapes. If you open it up like that, then you need to reclose it. And I'm not sure. There we go. So that's the shape tool, and there's a curve tool, they call it, which is like an open shape. It just draws lines, but it never fills in. So on. So enough on that. Let's delete that. Oops, or select it and delete it. Well, before I do, let me show you just a couple things. There's a couple more menus down here that say move to parent, which in other words, if you grab an object that's not a parent, you can make it into a parent. You can do that also by just dragging it up above the parent. The other thing up here is what I'm talking about. So if we make this a child here, we can make it back to not being a parent by either selecting that menu or dragging it up on the top, and it becomes on the same level. It's a separate object. But I wanted to show you that you can move it to parent. You can move it to the foreground, so you can move things to topmost or move to foreground, and so move-o to topmost. I'm not sure. I think that might be a typo there. But anyway, you can move things there. You can rename objects, and that's really helpful, especially if you have a bunch of objects that are parents with a bunch of subparts. You can rename them. It helps you keep straight, because when you start printing this stuff, you're going to want to show certain things that it'll only export what is currently visible. So that works well. Mirror horizontal, what that does is, I can show you that while we still have this object. You see what it looks like there. I'm going to say mirror horizontal. Oops, I don't got to select it. Mirror horizontal, and you can see it flipped it horizontally. Same thing, mirror vertical. Transform allows you to put in a scale, X and Y scale, and it'll transform that object based on those coordinates that you've put in there. Again, you can always come up here and say undo. And that's the main things. We talked about the alignment and so on. I'll show you one other thing. This is kind of cool. If we have another object here, it'll be that default red. If I select copy here and then select this object and select paste color, it'll bring that color in here. The other thing I can do is, if I select this object and let's say put some effects on there, like let's say lighting. Let's say I put in a flat highlight, and let's say I put in emboss it to this amount. If I select that and select copy, and I come over to this object and select paste effect, it carries those effects over. So that's interesting. It is interesting, though, that since this was transformed, you see the highlights are backwards, but it does carry most of the effects, and you can save you a lot of time if you want to create another object and make it look like another one, and you haven't thought to say, you've already sized it and made the shape, but oh crap, I forgot to copy the color and the effects for that other piece. You can do that in one fell swoop there. So that's pretty handy. And that's pretty much the things on that menu that you might need. So let's move on to the next one. Let's select all here. I'll say Control A. Oops. Hang on here. I'll do it with the menu. I'm not. Edit. Select all. Yeah, there is no shortcut on that. Delete. So let's go to the line tool. And this is I'm going to hold the shift key down to make a symmetrical circle. And you can see that I have a set of lines default, and you can see down here, there again we have slant, angle, vertex, which is the number of vertices. Let's say we wanted say 10. We wanted 10 divisions. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now 10 would give you only 9 spacing. So if you wanted to do like an altimeter, you might have to do 11. So then you would get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I guess 10 was right. But anyway, you get the idea. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. That's right. So we can change the border width here, down here, just like we did with other borders. And we can come up here to star depth, and this is somewhat similar. We can change the amount of inset that gets where that starts. We can change angles. Well, this is impractical, but you can change the angle there. Usually that's not needed. You can twist it, which is another thing that's usually not useful. It's kind of like the saw blade thing. We'll go back to 0 on that. And we can create a start and stop angle, just like before. straight down is 100 minus 180 and plus 180. So we can drag these values around and start this thing where we want it and make it in like an airspeed indicator. We can make it start in one place and we can make it end in another place. And the cool thing is that once we've got this thing, we can create a secondary copy just by copy and paste. So I'll come up here and I'll say copy, and then I'll say paste. Now we have two of them right on top of each other. As you can see, we've got the second one selected. So now let's say we wanted to put 5 gradations between each one of those. We can just change the number of vertices to 50, and then we can take, that would be 20 foot spacing, or 2 knot, you know what I mean. Let's change the star depth and make it a little bit less. And then let's say, let's change go to the first one and make the lines a little thicker so that they stand out. And you can see how easily we made a nice scale. And we could make one the parent of the other, and then we could just change the color. Let's make the background here, change the background color of the image to something dark. Okay, and then let's change the lines up here and make them something brighter. Instead of the border color of black, let's make it white. Oops, I didn't get both of them. Oh, I didn't make that, and I should have made the second one here a shape plus. Then it absorbs. Then it inherits the characteristics of the parent, so it has the same color. So you get the idea how we can make quite effectively. And I think I showed in my previous video, but I'll do it real quickly here. You can select, of course, you got the border width, and you can change to horizontal. Now we changed only one of them to horizontal. Unfortunately, I didn't change the first bit. But you can see there I changed it to horizontal, and now I have the scale. Let me go back to Control Z. If I select the parent, now I get them both, and you can make a scale and so on. But vertical scales, horizontal scales, it can all be done using the align tool. And again, all the other effects, lighting effects, can be used on those too. So that's enough of that. So bear with me here. We're almost there. Let's get rid of all of this, delete, and let's change the background color back to something that's, go up here to canvas and background color, and we'll change it back to white. And we only have a couple more here to go. We have the trim tool, which can trim the size of the space. And we can also do that if we have an object. Let's say we have this object and this object. Oops, I got to select another object. Let's that object. Now if we say trim visible up here under canvas, trim visible, trimming visible, you see it trims to the smallest bounds that will contain everything that's in the image. So that's how that works. So you can also put a grid on there, and here this is an 8x8 pixel grid. It's on there, but you can't see it, and we can turn it to snap to grid. We can also make the grid visible here with this little button here, and you can see there's the grid, and now you can see how it's snapping to the grid. And you can change the grid down as fine as you want. If you want that to be on and you want it to be visible, you can do that. So the last thing here is let's get rid of all that. Let's get delete, and I'm just hitting delete key now. And let's go back to this image, and this allows me to select an image. And I had a bunch of images on it, something I was working on, and I'm just going to grab one of these images. Let's say this one. And let's say I want to build an autopilot, and I want to use this image as a background. first of all, I can say trim visible, and it'll make it, and I got to go step out here to see the whole thing. And then what I can do is I could then position that to where I want it, and I can again use the arrow keys to up and down to make fine corrections in the movement of areas. And then I can take this bottom one, the bottom left. Well, I can take the trimming tool and just put it like where I want the image to be, and I can just go like that. You can see I've trimmed it. Now I can go back to 100%, which is this little 1 here, and now I have a layer in the back which I could lock, and I could use this as a template. And then I could start build now I would obviously start with the background, but let's say I wanted to create this button here. I could drag something like that, and then I could start playing with the separate X and Y's, and actually wouldn't want separate, just separate values, and start playing with that till I can get something that works as far as making that button look right. But you get the idea. And then I could add 3D effects. I could change the color for one thing, and I could, let's get the color up here. I guess select that, get up here to color, select that, and say gray. Okay, and I could even make it darker by dragging this down. And then I could say emboss. And I'll come down here to emboss, and I'll say the emboss that much. I'm going to increase the border width a little bit, and then maybe get rid of some of the depth. And you get the idea how next thing you know, we've created an instrument, a button. And we could clone those buttons. We could use the distribution to space them out, and we can draw these little lines. I will show you that to draw lines, really the easiest way to do it is to take this tool here and just drag a vertical thing, change the color to white, and then just play around up here with these coordinates. And I like to do it with the mouse scroll wheel. I can change the length, the left and right. I can change the thickness. You can see I can make it thick and thin as I need. I can move it up and down, and I can make it longer or shorter. And you can see how we're on our way here with our text and our different effects. We can create some of these effects with some of our gradients and so on, and create a pretty compelling looking little instrument for use with Air Manager. So we'll talk more about that in the future. The idea that you can bring an image in, though, is quite powerful. And you can also bring an image in to be part of your final project, too. Finally, there's a button down here that is called Create Knob, and that's because Skinman had a sister program, actually, that came first called Knobman, which is even a more complicated interface and probably even more powerful to create knobs. And it's really cool. It'll even create animated step images to animate knobs. And you can check that out online, but it's a little more complicated than this. And he made it so you can interface the two programs together. I've never really used Knobman very much. So one final thing I just wanted to do, I wanted to show you, for example, I'm going to take this bottom image and unlock it so that I can resize it. And I'm going to resize it down a little bit. And I'm going to leave that on. Then I'm going to leave that like that. And what I want to do is show you what happens when I'll put a couple other objects on there. Let's put that there. And let's put, I don't know, put that there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to say, come over here and I'm going to say, export image, and I'm going to give it a name of test, and I'm going to say export as a PNG with alpha. Okay, and now you saw that it had the white it has the white boundary around there with those two objects that I placed on there. Not realistic looking, but still. I'm going to save that to the desktop of my computer. Okay, and then I'm going to, if I can find it, I'm going to try to open that for you. Unfortunately, I may not be able to easily find it here without moving everything. Let's see where it ended up. There. I will open this, and you can see that's the image there, and you can see that there's a alpha area on the back where you see the checkerboard. Now this is paint.net. I use it again, free program, works just great, and you can use that to often take to composite certain things and work on instruments. So anyway, there you go. That's lesson number 2. We've looked at the whole interface now. We've looked at all the different tools that are available and all the effects. So in the next video, I promise I'll try to be a little bit shorter, but it may not be that easy because we're going to try to build a simple instrument. We're going to actually go through the steps of building a complete instrument using these tools to show you how you might approach that. So tune in for the next one. And thanks for watching this. If you like it, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, subscribe if you want to be sure to be notified. Click that little bell button down there so that you get notified when I publish a new video. And thanks for watching.